This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group, and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, we are fortunate enough to have a guest, a distinguished guest, Mr. Madhav Godbole. He was a former Home Secretary and author on the Babri Masjid dispute. As you all know, the Babri Masjid is located in the state of UP in a city called Ayodhya. It was built by a Mughal emperor many, many years ago. So thank you very much for coming to our show. You had a very distinguished career, Mr. Godbole. Thank you.
Thank thank you.
So, Mr. Godbole, tell me a little bit, what was the purpose of writing the book, The Babri Masjid Dilemma, an acid test for India's constitution? Do you believe this book on the temple mosque disputes is tearing apart the harmonious and the secular fabric of India?
Well, as you know, this was perhaps the most catastrophic event in India's history after partition and independence. It had major communal overtones, which one was worried about, and it was likely to create a permanent divide between the two major communities in India. And that is why all the time the worry was to protect the mosque in any circumstances from the government side. On the other side of the BJP political party, which was in power in Uttar Pradesh at that time, they wanted to bring it down at any cost. And therefore, it was a question of who finally wins. And you know what happened and who won. Unfortunately, uh, it had such large implications that I was particularly keen that people should know what all things happened during the course of handling of this situation. And if similar situation arises again, which you cannot rule out, are we in a better position to handle it than what we were at the time when Babri was to be protected? I could not have written all of this while I was in the government, and therefore
Oh, okay.
to take a I had to take a decision to leave the government and
So you
then to
decided to
place on
leave.
record, yeah, place on
So
record
why
all
did
that
you
happened
decide to
during
quit
the.
your job as India's Home Secretary? Because you do not want to compromise your values, your character, and conscience?
Yes, partly that is true. Also, you must realize that a civil servant's life in India is a very difficult life. People outside don't realize it, but it's a tightrope walk every day. A politician who is running the ministry and a bureaucrat who is advising the government on what ought to be done, what ought not to be done. And therefore, a time comes when it becomes very difficult to manage this kind of a conflict within the ministry. And that is what happened in the case of Babri episode. And it was too large, too important to overlook. And therefore, I thought at the end of my career, if I would make a greater impact on the problem by leaving rather than being a part of the system, I should do that. And that is what I did.
Well, thank you very much. So let me ask you this question. And as an American, as I look at India today, it has become divisive and polarized and increasingly intolerant. What can be done to bring the people together so that all of us can build a stronger, fairer, and tolerant India? Do you think the future of India rests upon the foundation of inclusive society?
Well, this you asked a very important question, which is not easy to answer, because the answer will have to be found by a number of conflicting interests in the society today, both on the Muslim side and on the Hindu side. And there will have to be a give and take on both sides in terms of understanding each other's position, which unfortunately is not happening today. And effort will have to be to make sure that secularism becomes a uh, part of life of everybody in terms of the way you conduct yourself in society or in educational institutions anywhere. But unfortunately, that does not seem to be happening yet, and therefore there is a very big challenge which India has to face.
Can you shed the bright lights on the future of India, which touts itself as a global beacon of hope for democracy around the globe and secularism? Obviously, people are divided along the faith line. An attack on one faith is an attack on all faith. When we attack each other, we are tearing apart the fabric of India.
I agree with you. This problem of communal disharmony has been there right since independence. In fact, India was born with a tremendous communal conflict on the border, and millions of people were dishoused and had to go from one part of the country to the other. Even at that time, even before the constitution was adopted, the Constituent Assembly Legislative at that time passed a resolution to say every effort must be made to separate religion from politics. This was way back in 1948. We adopted the constitution in 50. So it was even 2 years before the constitution was adopted. But there was this realization that this is something which must be done in the larger interest of the country. We have now 70 years have passed since then. We have still not been able to separate religion from politics. If at all, it is becoming stronger by day, and therefore there
Right.
is still this basic issue is addressed. I think our problems are going to get complicated.
So, my next question is you are a very much an advocate of the reforms, such as the police reforms, to ensure that the law and order can be restored, to make sure that you can build the bridges rather than walls and barriers, and to promote civility and unity, and to promote hope, not fear.
That is true, but that again is something which will call for major constitutional and legislative changes, which I have talked about in my new book. For example, as you know, when India became independent, at that time, primary concern of the founding fathers of the constitution was to provide for a strong center, that it must make sure that the country will not disintegrate and will remain as a unified, integrated country. And therefore, a number of provisions have been made in the constitution towards that end. But the situation at that time was quite different than what it is today in terms of management of law and order, in terms of crime, in terms of international ramifications of crime, etc. And therefore, for example, as compared to number of Western countries, here in India, police and public order are the subjects which come within the jurisdiction of the state governments, and the central government has nothing to do with them. They have to necessarily go through the state government, as we had to in the case of Babri demolition. And therefore, one major constitution amendment which is required is to make sure that these two subjects are brought from the concurrent list to the state list. This is a major political issue, and which will require a lot of statesmanship on all sides of all political parties. But I don't see that happening or coming forward in the near future.
So, Mr. Godbole, you are very eloquent in terms of your expressions, and I hope that I look forward to India that can provide equal opportunity and inclusive economic mobility to all who are willing to work hard, aim high, and pursue their dream. Do you see a brighter horizon in having an some sort of settlement for the Babri Masjid dispute? I have a fundamental question. As an American, it is hard for me, it's difficult for me to comprehend the why people fighting against each other because of the temples and the mosque. That's not going to create any job. India is facing a very difficult challenge of jobs. There's no hope for the younger people. The GDP growth has been the lowest in many, many years. And why can't they come together to build a better, stronger India so that it works for all of them? I guess you're not a
Again, it's
politician, so it's going to be difficult. Right, go ahead, Mr. Ball.
no, you have raised a
Go ahead.
very important question, which is in fact troubling all of us. The main difficulty here is the hardliners on both sides, Muslim side and also Hindu side. Unless there is a realization that India is a very peculiar special case where a number of religions have to coexist with each other, coexist in peace with each other, and therefore a lot of give and take will have to be necessary for the purpose which none of these people, none of both the communities are not prepared to do. I have sat through negotiations 25 years ago when this issue was at the time when joint meetings were held with the Muslims and with the Hindus to see whether there can be any common ground between the two, and nothing happened. Same thing has been repeated over a period of last 25 years. Even the latest effort by the Supreme Court to bring about a mediation between the two communities has not been successful. And therefore, we are finally driven to a situation which we should not be, of leaving this kind of a very sensitive issue to the Supreme Court to decide. According to me, this is an issue which should not be decided by a court, but should be decided by both the communities sitting together and doing a give and take in terms of understanding each other's position. But unfortunately, that is still not happening.
Let me shift some of your thoughts on the Indian government's move to abolish Article 370 in Kashmir. What can be done to restore communication and to restore respect for human rights and the freedom of expressions?
Well, firstly, I must explain that there is a lot of misunderstanding about what is 370, and um, misunderstanding often has been deliberately created. That 370 gives special status to Jammu and Kashmir is a common refrain which you find in all these arguments. This is totally wrong. 370 was not meant to give special status to Jammu and Kashmir. This is the first thing which has to be understood. Secondly, that the situation which obtained at that time, where Jammu and Kashmir was being invaded by Pakistan, at that time half of the territory was in the hands of the tribals who were attacking on India, and therefore the constitution could not be made applicable to that part. Therefore, interim arrangements had to be made to make sure that over a period of time, the constitutional provisions pertaining to India will get applied to J&K, and that is what 370 is about. Supreme Court in three judgments given at the level of a constitutional benches, which are five judge benches, which are the highest that you can get in a court to pronounce a judgment, have all declared that this Article 370 was a temporary provision meant to take care of the situation at that time. Therefore, about 70 years have gone by. Government, whichever was in power at the given time, were reluctant to deal with it because of its political sensitivity. But at the same time, I have dealt with this issue for last 20-25 years, and it is my firm conviction that there could have been no other alternative but to abolish Article 370 if Kashmir issue was to be solved, and that is what we have done. Now, you raised the question of human rights, or you raised the question of restrictions imposed in that area. You must realize that we are a democracy. We are answerable in terms of how we handle the situations. Whichever government is in power, it doesn't make any difference. But we are finally answerable to Parliament, to the legislature. And in this kind of a sensitive issue, we had to make sure that there will be no law and order problem, there will be no firing, there will be no deaths of people till the situation comes to a normal. And therefore, in the interim period, these actions had to be taken. I'm sure slowly, one by one, these will be the restrictions will be lifted um, and you will find normalcy returning. But this is something
Well,
which, again, all political parties will have to play a role.
but the pillar of a democracy, the anchor that which is the stability of a democracy is freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of people, so that they can express themselves. That's how democracy flourishes. That's how democracy creates a common cause. So it does not reflect the it does not reflect the values of India in the United States and around the world when you suppress the freedom of press, when you put people in jail and there's no communication. So I think I think the challenge is how do you obviously the saying that it's my problem, we'll take care of it is probably not going to solve it. And by putting as chief ministers into the jail or house arrest, whatever the case may be, is a totally inconsistent what India touts as the largest democracy in the world.
I couldn't agree with you more. But as I said, unusual situations call for unusual actions in terms of how to manage the situation. And this is an
Yeah,
unusual situation. For example, you must realize that in the last, at least from 1990 till the present day, Kashmir was more or less always on the boil. We had all the
yeah.
freedom in the world to do everything in Jammu and Kashmir. But what did it lead to? It led to lot of agitation everywhere. There was no peace in Jammu and Kashmir, and in fact, world over, people used to say such a large army is being deployed in Jammu and Kashmir, and therefore it is not a free area. This is not true. But to take care of that kind of a situation, there was no other alternative, particularly when you have uh, insurgency being encouraged from across the border. This is a peculiar problem of India, which is faced by very few democracies and which has to be realized by the Western world that there is an everyday problem of the uh, 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 the the people being pushed from across the border into India to create a problem. A lot of money comes from across the border to finance the activities of, and as a Home Secretary, I have dealt with it right from 1990. And even at that time, this was the situation. Therefore, the problem must be seen in totality. And your concerns are quite valid, justified, but I think one would have to deal with it in patience.
But it is it has a put a I mean one of the my friend senator was there in India last week and he said he wanted to go to Kashmir and they said you cannot go. So that's the putting restriction on the freedom of the expression of the people, and they also do not allow the foreign, the journalists to go there. So it's a very difficult situation. And I mean, let me just change the subject. The Kashmir people themselves have to be an active participant in the process. In order for you cannot use a gun and violence to basically tell them this is what we're going to do. That never worked before. And if you go back to the Gandhians and non-violence, that's what Gandhi did to get
Yeah.
rid of the British aristocrat and what British did to America, to the United States, and America did the same thing with the British, British tyranny. We got rid of them, right? Let me change the subject, and I know you're so eloquent in your expressions, and I appreciate your leadership, what you do. How Indian diaspora can help India achieve its fullest potential?
Well, first, I think as compared to the earlier days, now the Indian diaspora is large in number, is educated, highly educated,
Mhm.
is highly aware of what is going on in the country as compared to what it was in the past. Also, as compared to the past, they take a lot of interest in what is happening in India and what can be done better, which are all good signs, and we should all take advantage of it in terms of building bridges with the Indian diaspora. And that is what is being done during the last few years. And I'm glad there is a movement in that direction. I believe that there are two areas in which Indian diaspora can help. One is institution building, because
Mhm.
ultimately success of democracy is dependent on how strong its democratic institutions are. And we find today there is a lot of weakness in terms of number of these institutions. Therefore, building institutions, building bridges, enabling adoption of the best practices abroad to suit Indian conditions, etc., is one area. And second is empowerment of a common citizen in terms of right to information. For example, this is something which we picked up in a large measure from number of Western countries, and I think as compared to a number of other countries, we have made a fairly good success of it. But it is faltering. Right to information
Yes,
is faltering in India as compared to
very
a
much
number of
so.
other countries, and that is an
Right.
area which diaspora can pay some attention.
Well, the diaspora can also help. I'm one of the diaspora that have given millions of dollars to university that I went to school, which is Aligarh Muslim University, several $1 million. And my wife is an American, so we're going there next week to inaugurate that. So we are in this together, correct? As
Sure,
President
sure.
Clinton said many, many times. So it is important for the India diaspora to help not only in education but also in the climate change, in the healthcare, provide the seed money for the capital, provide some innovations and entrepreneurship to create job, build prosperity.
Sure, but these are oftentimes looked at by the Westerners as begging bowl mentality. That's why I didn't talk
Well,
about them because
well,
in, India
you have
should
to.
now ask for cooperation in fields in which it can take maximum advantage in terms of mutual give and take.
Right, I agree, and we also have to comply with the IRS rules and regulations because the Indian American taxpayer should not be funding in a foreign country, and you getting a
Right,
tax write-off. So that's another challenge that
right.
which I have a challenge also. Most of the people have a challenge in terms of being American. But thank you very much for your interview. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all you do to make a difference and keep working to make the India as a beacon of hope for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, this is Frank Islam wishing you a great week and thank you for watching.